The Charlotte Hornets continue their losing ways over the weekend. Miles Bridges returns, and Brandon Miller has his best game of his rookie season. We discuss it today. Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcast, and that includes YouTube, where a surprisingly happy Doug Branson, at least seemingly surprisingly happy Doug Branson, is dancing. But I need all the positivity that I can get, so we'll get to him in just a moment. First, I need to mention that this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, there's the happy Doug Branson. You can check him out on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. I'm Walker Mail. You can listen to me on Sports Radio 92.7 FM daily, 12 to 3 p.m. on Wes and Walker. All right, Doug, you want to tell me why you are seemingly happy, which is great. I don't want to kill it. But if it was based off of what the Charlotte Hornets did this weekend, if you had any care about what the Carolina Panthers did on Sunday, I would not imagine you'd be so happy.
Oh, I feel great about Charlotte Hornets basketball right now because you have to remember, folks, it's darkest before the dawn, okay? You have to go all the way down sometimes before you can get back up again. And I think the worst thing that could have happened to this team this season would be for them to, compete for a play-in spot or something that would trick these new owners into thinking that the plan that we've all seen develop or really not develop over the past couple of years was the right plan to continue working with. Instead, what we're seeing is it completely collapse. And hopefully that convinces this new ownership group that it's going to be time to take a completely new direction, because I think that's what this franchise desperately needs, is a full rethinking of this entire project. And so this weekend, I think, was one step in that direction.
Yeah, I'm starting to click on the standings a little bit more to see how the Hornets, now that we're in the double-digit games, it doesn't matter as much with only 5, 6, 7, right? Now the Hornets are 3-9, and the Hornets are only above two teams in the Eastern Conference. They're above the Detroit Pistons. They're above the Washington Wizards. Both teams in which they lost to on their way to a 3-9 record. So even the two teams below them, they lost one single game, and they lost a couple of times over the weekend. On Friday, they lost to Milwaukee. Then they lost to the Knicks on the second night of a back-to-back. There's one good thing, depending on how you view it. Maybe there are a couple good things, but Brandon Miller, we'll get to him in a moment. Miles Bridges returned, though, here, and we talked about that really all last week. We anticipated it. Steve Clifford told us that Miles Bridges was going to play a significant role right off of the bat. I thought maybe there was even a chance that he would start. He does not, but he certainly plays starters minutes. Against the Bucks, he plays 33 minutes, and then against the Knicks, he goes out there and he plays 32. So already you're playing him starters minutes. And Miles on the court is going to help this team. And we know that already. He hit his only 3 against the Knicks, 8 of 12 from the field, 19 points against New York. You go back to Friday, his debut for the first time in a while, 6 of 13, 2 of his 4 3-pointers he hit. Also ended up with 17 points, helping out in a couple of different areas, 4 assists for the Hornets, 5 rebounds, a couple steals in that game as well. So Miles Bridges helping this team as much as he possibly can. But this squad, Doug, it's not good enough right now. PJ Washington was so bad this week, not hitting any shots. He gave us a goose egg in the second game. Gordon Hayward now, his production is falling a ton. So Miles comes back, and now PJ and Gordon, their production just completely falls off of a cliff. And I will say, we can start this off, too, if you want to. When Miles Bridges was introduced and when he did enter the game, there were more cheers than boos. In fact, a significant amount more cheers than boos. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on the introduction, the reaction to the introduction, as well as what Miles did on the court.
Oh, I thought the introduction was handled well by the broadcast team, who essentially said Miles Bridges is back. They didn't run any kind of featurettes or anything on Miles Bridges. I think everyone understood the awkwardness of the entire situation, and I thought handled it as best as they could. In terms of the arena's reaction, it doesn't surprise me. People pay money and they buy tickets to go to an arena and cheer. And I don't really expect a mob of human beings to really have the kind of discernment that, I think people may have online or may have, when talking one-on-one with someone. It's just not the same thing. So that reaction doesn't surprise me at all. And part of my reasoning why you wouldn't want to bring him back in this situation is because you open yourself up as an organization to that image to everyone else. It's embarrassing, but it's not surprising that was the reaction. But to the Miles Bridges on the court impact, it was immediate, and I think you and I had legitimate questions about whether he would be able to immediately impact the game after not playing basketball for nearly a year and a half. I think that was a legitimate question, but he answered that. He fought for a defensive rebound that led to 2 free throws by LaMelo Ball. That was like the first play back when he checked in. And then from there, it was physical defensive play that I think forced Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis into some tough shots, forced the Knicks into some tough shots when he was one-on-one with guys. And then just his ability to get to the rim. I mean, that's something that not many Hornets have. I mean, really, the one guy that does have an ability to get to the rim at will is the guy that they're missing right now in Terry Rozier. LaMelo Ball can get to the rim with certain matchups, but as you and I have chronicled, it's less like straight automatic because it's straight line speed, and it's more craftiness with the ball and the length that he has that he can use to get to the rim. But you see with Miles, it's just like, look, if he wants to get to the rim, he's getting there. And it's really just a matter of, can he hit the layup or can he get fouled or not?
So you're right. As far as the questions about him immediately picking up where he left off, I thought maybe some rust might be there. And I understand it wasn't an injury. This isn't a normal thing that people miss time with. Other people miss time because they're out for 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 6 weeks because of a lower or upper body injury. That was not the case with Miles. I still thought, that's a long time to miss basketball. What I did think, though, and what I still am interested in seeing if this plays out this way, I thought maybe adrenaline and maybe even we underestimated just some kind of freshness to Miles because he hadn't played in so long, not in a year and a half, or not a year and a half, but a year and some change. So what I wonder is if Miles does have this adrenaline, he's ready to go right off the rip. He's actually going to have a little bit more of his breath than everybody else in a second night of a back-to-back, and that's going to help him. Maybe you see like a 5-game sample size of this. And then, Doug, I do wonder, once you start to get into the normal routine that is the NBA, do we see some kind of rust come back? Do we see some kind of drop-off? Because we know about the rookie wall. Rookies just aren't used to this kind of thing. And so you'll see it, 20 games, 40 games, whenever it may hit. Do you see I haven't played in 92 appearances wall? That's what I want to know, if you have that with Miles, and if that happens after a 10-game sample size, whatever. But you are right, man. Like, this is something we knew about, and this is something Steve Clifford knew about. Miles Bridges is at worst, it doesn't even feel like he's the third most talented, unless you want to count Brandon and just put a whole bunch of stock into his future, right? Right now, Miles Bridges is the second best player on this team outside of LaMelo. That's always been true. We knew that when he was going to come back. That's the reason he was going to get $30 million annually. He played like a guy that is going to help this team and was going to help this team last year. Steve Clifford knew it. That's why I played him over 60 minutes in 2 games played, because there's nowhere else you can go to. Mitch Kupchak knew it, because that's how they viewed their big offseason addition, was that, all right, we're getting him on a cheap deal as well, getting him on the qualifying offer. And this is somebody that at basketball value is more than $8 million. So this is something that was going to help the Hornets, even in 2 bad losses, by the way. Like, they got beat down against Milwaukee. The Knicks separated themselves. But it's not Miles on the court. We know that. Like it was a lot of other things going poorly, like PJ and Gordon, as I mentioned.
No, yeah. I mean, he fills in so many of the gaps that this team has had since he's been out. I mean, it's not surprising that he comes in and it's like, oh yeah, they have been missing a guy who can throw it to, and he just goes and gets you an ISO bucket. Like there just aren't many of those players on the roster. Oh yeah, he can like just 1v1 defense, like lock a guy up. Oh yeah, they've been missing that. I mean, there's just so many of these things, and you can see already that like the timing and stuff, and this shouldn't be surprising either because he has been practicing with the team, but in that second game against the Knicks, he catches those 2 lobs from LaMelo Ball. And so like that attack that you remember, from 2 seasons ago under Borrego, like it's already starting to come back just even after 2 games. There's a little bit of, I think, of a timing or just a rhythm issue when he goes to the rim. Some of these layups that he's attempting, they're just kind of dying on the rim. It's just odd how the ball is landing on the rim. And I think that's something that as he continues on, over the next couple of weeks, he'll probably figure out as well. But look, I mean, this was a guy who was the leading scorer of the team. He was, good for 25 on most nights. And I think he will quickly get back to that. The question I think that fans should have is like, was it smart for the franchise to wait this long to add that back in and accumulate all of the losses and accumulate some of the bad habits that this team has formed since Miles Bridges went away? I think that's a legitimate question for Mitch Kupchak and the rest of this organization.
Well, and continues to do. Miles Bridges helps this team. I don't know how many
But it didn't get them a win. They didn't win either game.
Right. That's the point. I don't know how many wins Miles Bridges' presence gets this squad because it's just been so bad, and it has people down bad here in Charlotte because, boy, the Carolina Panthers are not going to help them either, and it's not like that's going to get any better. There is one thing that separates the 2 squads. You told me about this before we hopped on the mic, and we're going to talk about the 2 things that separate this squad in a positive way for the Hornets, by the way. Let's get to it. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
Let's talk about the rookie performance. Brandon Miller, he scored 29, his best game so far as an NBA player against the Knicks. We'll break that down in just a moment. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America, and it's the easiest way and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and then you just watch the winnings roll on in. With the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball with the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you can go with the most popular player of each league. LeBron, Travis, Kelsey. You can have them at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions. Maybe you want to mix in some touchdowns in there. It's that easy. And plus, this is the best part about Prize Picks, in my opinion. They offer a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured for football and basketball games. If you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. It happens every weekend, especially in football, so that is a big deal. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. More Locked On Hornets ahead. It's pretty depressing right now for Charlotte sports. If your life is directly tied to this, I don't know about how healthy that is. That's fine. Whatever. I'm not going to legislate how tied up your life is into sports fandom. What I will tell you is that it can't be going well, even if you're like a casual fan. You don't have a lot to gloat about right now. The Panthers, I don't know if we're going to see somebody fired within the Carolina Panthers organization today. That might happen. With the Charlotte Hornets, yeah, this weekend had people calling for Steve Clifford's job pretty quickly. So, we can talk about that maybe a little bit later on in the week. There are more games to be had, including tonight against the Boston Celtics. You mentioned the one positive thing for the Hornets compared to the Carolina Panthers. It's been that the Hornets rookie has been performing well this year. The Panthers, not so much. And maybe for different reasons, but this is, go check out Julian Council to discuss the whole Bryce Young thing. Mm-hmm. Brandon Miller had a great game against the Knicks. He scored 29 points, Doug. He hit 5 of his 7 3-pointers attempted. Ooh. He got hurt and sprained his ankle in the first game they had against the Knicks, where it looked like he was about to have a great Madison Square Garden debut. Mm-hmm. What really he did was continue against the Knicks because he was so destined to have a good performance against them, and injury did not matter. The Prize Picks injury reboot policy came in, and Brandon Miller was able to deliver the second time out. Doug, it comes down to the shot making for me, man. And it's his ability to get outside shots. That's what it is for me. So using a screen and taking the one dribble in, hitting the mid-range. Mm-hmm. It's floating because there's not a lot of attention on him right now, but it's him floating, taking advantage of that, and then hitting wide open shots. It's him when and he's still getting closely defended. I don't mean it like he's wide open on every shot. It's just he's taking advantage of whatever space he's given, right? So then when he's coming off of a screen too to get free, then there's just a little light of day for him to let that thing fly. And he did, and he would hit it. There was a tough shot made once he did get into the mid-range where it was kind of like an awkward shot, but he got hit and it still went in. It's the shot making really from the perimeter in the mid-range, Doug, that continues to impress me. And that's how he's able to go off for 29 against New York. Well,
that last attempt that you were talking about, the one where he got hit, it was kind of awkward, but he just throws the ball up and it goes in. I mean, those are the kind of shots that I feel like all-star players, all NBA players, that's the kinds of shots that go in where you go, wait a minute, that had no business. That basketball had no right to go in to that hoop, and it did. And so those are the kinds that give me the tingles with Brandon Miller. If he's going to start hitting those kinds of shots, then but his ability to get to a spot that he liked and knock it down, I think that was the most encouraging thing that I saw, because and not just off-ball action, but when he had the ball in his hands, when he was controlling the possession, his ability to get to somewhere where he was comfortable and score it. And you're right, we've seen him do it in the mid-range, but now in this game, he was starting to finally expand that game back to the three-point line. And, that has big, huge positive impacts for the Charlotte Hornets going forward. They do have, that's the most encouraging thing right now, is that they do have pieces. And honestly, like, Brandon Miller's not the lone bright spot for the Charlotte Hornets. It is the bright spot relative to the Carolina Panthers that stands out the most. But you also have LaMelo Ball, like, fully back and fully the offensive weapon that we've come to know and love him as, and he can't stop scoring 25 points and can't stop scoring 30-plus points, almost set a career high against the Bucks, and he had a big game against the Knicks as well. And, I get it. There are a lot of turnovers for LaMelo, and, a little bit of questionable play late. Obviously, his defense is always going to be a big question mark, especially when the Hornets are addicted to giving up 30 points in a quarter. Walker, they played 8 quarters over the weekend, okay? In only 2 of those quarters did they hold teams to under 30 points, one in the Bucks game and one in the Knicks game. And in both of those quarters, those teams scored 28 points. They were 2 away. Yeah. The Hornets were 4 points away from giving up 30-point quarters in 8 consecutive quarters. Like, this defense is bad, and LaMelo is part of that. But on the flip side of the coin, he is such a huge offensive weapon that, and especially on a team that doesn't have a ton of help from Gordon Hayward and PJ Washington at this point. Mark Williams, I think, has been neutralized as an offensive piece right now because they need him to focus so much on rim protection and rebounding. And I'm not sure he was a guy that you were ever going to run things through anyway. His big offensive nights just completely come from offensive rebounding. So, LaMelo is such a big part of that I can't sit here and critique his defense all that much. I'm just not going to do it.
All right, so 2 things. One, I want to fire this joke off. You said they were addicted to giving up 30-point quarters. What about scratch your neck like Tyrone Buggums? Are you that addicted to giving up? That's what I wanted to throw out there. Yeah, I thought it was worth it.
It is amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, I was gonna say the bright spot. I was wondering if you were going to go with LaMelo and just how far in you were going to go with LaMelo, because the timeline, I don't want to say it's polarizing. I'd still say people are more in favor of watching LaMelo do what he does. But there are the plays that are head scratching from LaMelo to make it to the point where there might be national pundits, there are local pundits that will discuss, hey, LaMelo continues to make all of these mistakes, and that's hurting the team when it comes to winning time, where, yes, it's hard to get angry at a 34-point performance, shooting 8 of 13 from the three-point line. But people will still point to the same stuff, whether it be actually driving to the rim, which has been a problem in his career. He's gotten better at it in the little start to this season. But also it's the shot selection for a lot of people. It's the turnovers that you mentioned against the Knicks. He had those 3 turnovers against the Bucks. He only had 2, so only 5 combined. But I know some stuff happened late. But yeah, the polarization here, Doug. Yeah, I guess you discussed it a little bit. Are you surprised to see that on your timeline?
No, I mean, LaMelo is a polarizing player, and he was, during the lead up to that draft, and he was a polarizing player to the teams that were looking to draft him. I think that's why he fell to the Charlotte Hornets. I'm sure there were people within the Warriors organization who were like, we cannot pass up on this guy. And then there was another group of people within the Warriors organization that were saying, we cannot take this guy. And so he fell to the Charlotte Hornets. But my rebuttal to those folks is save that critique, save that energy, if you will, for when they are actually in winning time. They can't even get into winning time because Gordon Hayward is 1 of 7 from the field for 4 points, and PJ Washington is 1 of 10, and the 1 came in garbage time, and meanwhile, PJ Washington has 6 turnovers, and that's a guy that they just gave a bag of cash to. So, I'm just not going to sit here. There will be time.
You don't have to be sorry. Okay.
When this team is, well, I will apologize. I won't apologize. I will never apologize for that.
Don't apologize.
And you know what? And you know what? After everything that I saw this weekend, I do have an apology to make. Okay, are you ready for this?
Yep.
I do have an apology to make. I apologize for doubting Ish Smith, because my God, Ish Smith, I was down bad on Ish Smith, but he has played really well in that Knicks game. 3 of 6 from the field, 7 points. Not turning the basketball over like he was in the first couple of games. He's hitting some shots, getting into his mid-range, bailing out possessions. He hit a couple of buzzer beaters. Ish Smith, boy, I'm sorry for doubting you, Ish.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, well, look, you're the bigger man. You apologize, so it's all good. By the way, LaMelo had 6 turnovers against the Bucks. I was like, wait, that's I had 2 because he only had 2 personal fouls.
Well, PJ had 6 against the Knicks. No, listen, the turnovers are a real issue. I'm not debating that. But I'm just saying, let's have that discussion when he has 6 turnovers and 3 in the fourth quarter of a game where they've had a 5-point lead at some point. Instead of both of these games, they've just gotten down and never been able to get back up. And those issues run deeper than LaMelo Ball.
Well, yeah, and I was correcting myself, by the way. No, you're right to bring up PJ. As much as I like PJ, I had said LaMelo only had 2 against the Bucks. He had 6, but the turnovers are a problem, especially and that's the thing with PJ, man. With PJ, when you put up 10 shots and you miss almost all of them, you barely got out of that ball game with a bucket. And we did see this. I remember the bad performance. I think it was against Phoenix 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, where he went 0 of whatever. And it was just, this is, as much as I value what PJ does, I still think it's a good contract for the Charlotte Hornets based on what they're doing in the future. The shooting confidence with PJ, it can be pretty apparent right away at the beginning of the game. Is he knocking him down? Great. And what was great about him at the beginning of the season was that he wasn't relying on his 3-point shot falling in order for him to get those buckets. That was phenomenal. And it looked sustainable, Doug. All their dunks, their open dunks, they're created for him. And now, this is the thing about Miles, right? Now it's a crowded front court.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I was going to say, a lot of people are having the discussion right now of just as LaMelo Ball, gets back into his groove, the 2 guys who were carrying the team while LaMelo was in a funk, Gordon Hayward and PJ Washington, now they're starting to fall off, and you can't sync those 2 things together. And I'm like, this isn't about LaMelo Ball. People who have been watching long enough know what this discussion is going to turn into, which is, can Miles Bridges and PJ Washington coexist together? The answer, up until Miles Bridges, left the team, was no. Was like a definitive no. Like, you can't get those two guys to play well together.
PJ at the 5, that was the way you did it, right? But like when you wanted to go with the traditional center with Mark Williams or whoever, right? I mean, we'll see as we get more games under their belt there. But that was the way you did it. It was you went small, and then you had PJ 5, Miles 4, and then you wrote them that way. But if you wanted to go with a traditional center, then is that going to happen? So yeah. They're going to need everybody, right? They're going to need PJ, Gordon, LaMelo, Miles, Brandon Miller to have a shot at getting one win. Because, Doug, this is a team right now that's playing as bad a brand of basketball as almost any other squad. Detroit and Washington in the Eastern Conference are the two teams you would point to, but they beat the Hornets. They got at least one win against the Hornets. That's how bad it's been to start the season. And the Wizards in that first game just freaking destroyed them. All right, let's move on. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
The losses do continue to pile up. Maybe we have some big picture conversation about where the season is heading coming up in the next segment. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can score early and often this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, even more than that. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. One more segment to go. Locked On Hornets. Doug, even without Miles Bridges, I had high enough hopes in the first 10 games. I thought there was a real shot that they could go 6-4. Like 7-3 is probably where I would have drawn the line. That's a little too good. But without Miles Bridges, the easy strength of schedule. Again, I just mentioned a couple of the teams that they played. That's what's so frustrating. This was a schedule that even without Miles, they could have taken advantage of. Yes, some of this is not their fault because of the injuries that they've suffered, but Steve Clifford wasn't giving them that excuse, especially after a Miami Heat loss. And they played bad enough in those games that we can apply context and say, okay, even with guys healthy, I'm not sure they would have squeaked that one out. So they fall to 3-7. Miles Bridges comes back. Now they're 3-9. This season feels over. It felt over even a couple of games ago. They're going to have a lot of ground to make up with injuries that they continue to experience constantly. With now, there are some chemistry questions that they have to answer. Miles, PJ, Gordon. Are they going to trade anybody? You remember Mark Williams is in the fold. He's regressed since the first few games that he's had, and now you're talking about a team that doesn't have a shot for the play-in if they continue to play right now. And Steve Clifford is a guy that I don't know if he's going to last through the season with new ownership here. And that they're not so different in Carolina than Carolina that way, where Steve Clifford making it through the season, there's a legitimate chance that he's gone. Same thing even with Mitch Kupchak. So any big picture answers here, Doug, as to what can happen for the Hornets that might make you feel better?
I wish I had some answers that existed on this roster. I wish I could tell you, well, play this guy more, play this guy less, change up the strategy here offensively, do this defensively. The problem is that if you look over the course, especially of the last 5 games, Steve Clifford's trying everything. He's throwing the kitchen sink out there. I never thought I'd see the day that Steve Clifford was running junk defenses for vast majorities of the game.
Oh, Cliff going to zone, baby. Do you like that? Yeah.
Right. He's doing, and if you look at the lineups, he has tried every player combination that I think he has available to him. And look, you can't use injuries as an excuse because really you've had most of your starting lineup, enough of your starting lineup healthy this season to win some basketball games. Yes, the competition has been a little tougher lately with these 2 games against the Knicks, who are playing well, and the Bucks. But at the same time, it's not that they lost these 2 games, Walker. It's that they weren't really all that competitive because defensively, they can't stop anyone. They just get constantly crushed on the ball. And by the way, part of that is Brandon Miller at the 2 doing what we thought Brandon Miller would do at the 2, which is struggle defensively. He was great offensively, but when he had to guard Jalen Brunson in the pick and roll, it was just like, it was easy for Jalen Brunson to get wherever he wanted. And when he had to guard Damian Lillard, those are 2 tough matchups. But when you play the 2 and you're playing alongside LaMelo, who they're always going to hide on defense, like that's the level of player that you're going to have to guard. Brandon Miller will get to a point where he can at least slow those guys down. Maybe not shut them down because, there's a certain level of player like Damian Lillard that you're just not going to shut down. But you could slow him down more than you did. That's going to happen as he develops. But he's just not ready right now. But the Hornets are forced to play him there. And so that's a situation that this organization has put themselves into because the problems aren't the starting lineup. The problems are that they don't have any depth. When they break the lineup, they don't have enough shooting and they don't have enough defense in this lineup. There was a funny moment. I can't remember if it was in the Bucks or the Knicks game, but Eric Collins noted that the Charlotte Hornets right now are playing all 5 players on the floor right now are players that they've drafted. Well, they were down 15 at that point. And it was like, yeah, that's the problem. They have drafted players and waited. It takes time for players to develop. And then you don't know if they're going to quite develop how you want them to, just like James Bouknight, just like Kai Jones. And so you put yourselves in this position and you haven't reloaded that depth. And that has to be hung on the necks of this organization. That's their burden to carry. You look at teams like Houston right now. Houston is a legitimate team in the Western Conference when just a season ago, they fired Stephen Silas because they were miserable. That was a miserable team, helmed by all players that Houston had drafted. Then they go out in free agency and say, hey, let's get some legitimate level talent in here. And now all of a sudden they're a factor in the Western Conference. It can be that way for Charlotte too, but they have to want to, and they have to find people who are willing to use every tool available to them to improve this team. And that's ultimately where I think this thing ends up. It's got to be rethinking, clean house, figure it all out from there.
So, and the idea of clean house is everybody really is on the table except for LaMelo and Brandon. Even with Mark struggling, I don't think you are going to be happy to deal Mark Williams. You still want him it would still take a decent amount, in my opinion, to get rid of him. But really, it's LaMelo and Brandon. And I guess Miles, just because, Miles has right to first refusal for any trade. But then also we're, of course, talking about Steve Clifford and Mitch Kupchak as the first 2 guys that we discussed. It probably is there's going to be a different era here, Doug. And it's all about timing. Is it going to happen before the season ends, or is it going to happen during the offseason? Because I think you and I both would agree it would take a pretty big turnaround from this team for us to feel like there's a legitimate shot both Mitch Kupchak and Steve Clifford return. Part of it is this is just what happens when you have new ownership at the helm. And also when they're losing this badly, when you don't have a ton of hope for them to win some of these games, that spells guys losing their jobs. And I love Steve Clifford as a guy, the guy. And even as a coach, you're right. I don't know how much you put some on him, but he is trying everything, and the talent just isn't there defensively. So this is just how it goes with NBA franchises. And really, it's all a matter of time, in my opinion. I just don't know when it's going to happen, but I absolutely expect that it's going to happen.
The team does not appear to be responding to Steve Clifford. Like, the performances don't reflect a team that is, ingesting the messages that we know Steve Clifford is trying to send and then, outputting them in their performances. Like, defensively, the message is just not there. And I think it's a mix of personnel and personality that I think are not really coming together here in a way that's causing them to just have one single quarter where they really stop a team from doing whatever they want. I think it is going to take, and you're right, it is timing. Like, when do you make all of those moves? But I think ultimately that's where we're heading. I would suggest doing it sooner rather than later, exploring all of those options. And you're right, it is a matter of putting everyone on the table except for LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller. But, and, you know, on the list of like franchise malpractices that have been committed over the seasons, I mean, just the fact that you only have 2 legitimate centers on your roster, neither of them can shoot. One of them gets hit in the head and has concussion symptoms and has to miss a game. And you just got lucky in that Miles Bridges returned when he did, and that you could even go small. But even then, in going small and playing him at 4 and PJ at 5, you're at a disadvantage against 2 teams in the Bucks and the Knicks that have legitimate size. And so,
that's true.
You know,
I mean, up for that lineup. Yeah.
Right. I mean, just losing one backup center. And we screamed it from the rooftops in the offseason. Hey, by the way, you don't have a legitimate backup point guard, and you really don't have an option if one of your centers sprains an ankle or has one single injury. What are you going to do? Bring Mensah from Greensboro? That's not an answer. Despite what you heard at Media Day and the preseason, this was never a serious play-in and playoff team, and it hasn't been for the past couple of seasons, even going back to Borrego. This has not been a serious playoff team, but that's what they've been trying to sell you on, and doing nothing in the meantime. And it's a shame. It really is a shame that I feel like the past 3 or 4 years of Hornets basketball has been a gigantic waste of time and a gigantic waste of season ticket holder money, and I think the new owner should do something about it.
Well, one thing that is also nice, though, last thing is when James Najee comes over, that's going to be a 20-win minimum impact that he has. And so once he comes over, I'm glad that will propel them in play-in tournament time. Having that center rotation locked up, and then defensively, you know, you turning into like a top 5 team from like 32. I don't think, number one, I'm not ridiculous with what I'm asking from Najee. I just think 35 to like top 5.
That's good.
That.
That's good. I was thinking over the weekend of doing some kind of tweet that was like a joke tweet of like, well, when LaMelo gets back, everything will be fine. Well, when Terry gets back, and just scratch him out. Well, when Miles Bridges gets back, everything will be fine. That's been the mentality of this team for going on 3 seasons now. Well, when this happens, everything will be fine. And then the thing happens and it's not fine. And so we'll add James Najee to that list. When James Najee gets here, everything will be fine.
I can't wait. I just want him to be, I want him to get 5 fouls, 5 blocks, 12 rebounds, and 0 of 4 from the field. And it will be glorious, and they will win 20 more games because of it. All right, that'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your pods. Come back with us tomorrow. We will recap the game they have tonight against the Boston Celtics. Another game at home. This one also going to be a tough one, but they have this opportunity against the Celtics at the Spectrum Center. Have a great rest of your day.